They say love doesn't always arrive young, or pure, or easy. Sometimes it comes when you've already learned to live without it. Sometimes it knocks on the door when all hope is lost. And yet, it changes your whole life. This is the true story of how a man marked by grief found light in the eyes of a humble young woman who never imagined she would become the heartbeat he had been searching for years. In the vast silent lands of the north, where the wind carries the scent of freshly cut crops and the roads seem endless, there stood a hacienda known for its grandeur and the sorrow of its owner. Don Esteban Herrera, a respected, hardworking, and reserved man, had spent 4 years trying to fill the void left by the death of his wife Helena. Despite the daily activity, the constant movement of the farmhands, the animals, and the life that sprang up everywhere, his soul remained stuck on the day he lost the woman who had been his companion. What he didn't know was that fate, silent and patient, was about to bring into his life a young woman who wasn't looking for love, fortune, or a special future. She was only looking to survive, and without intending to, she would transform his world from the ground up. The morning Marga Luz arrived at the hacienda. The sun was just rising, an air smell of damp earth. She was walking with a small cloth bag over her shoulder, wearing simple clothes, worn shoes, and a tired expression that spoke of sleepless nights and uncertain days. However, in her eyes there was something that contrasted with her appearance, a quiet, almost shy spark, which revealed that despite her hardships, she still believed in the goodness of the world. She had traveled through 3 towns looking for work, hearing that the Herrera hacienda always needed new hands and that they paid better than other employers. Something she was grateful for, because she had been eating whatever she could find and sleeping wherever she could for weeks. When she arrived, the laborers looked at her with that mixture of curiosity and pity that they usually direct at those who arrive with nothing. And one of them accompanied her to the office where Don Esteban was reviewing papers and signing records. He looked up as soon as he heard the soft knock on the door, and for a moment he remained silent. Observing the young woman who stood upright, looking at the floor, as if afraid of taking up space, he noticed the slenderness of her hands, the cautious way she breathed, as if she expected to be rejected, and without quite knowing why, her voice became softer than usual when he asked her name. She answered, "Marga Luz," in a low but clear tone, and explained that she knew how to cook, clean, sew, and do almost any housework. She didn't speak of her past or her loneliness, because deep wounds aren't revealed in the first conversation, and Esteban didn't ask either, because he was used to respecting silences. He simply observed her for a few seconds, and then said that she could stay, that they needed help in the kitchen and the pantry, and that the caretaker would show her everything she needed. The young woman gave a small bow, thanked him with a sincerity that disconcerted him, and left behind the older woman who came to greet her. As she walked away, Esteban returned to his papers, but something inside him had shifted, just a tiny, almost imperceptible change, as if that young woman had moved a fine thread on a loom that had remained static for years. Meanwhile, Marga wandered through the hacienda, impressed by its size and enormous corrals. Barns bustling with activity, green fields that seemed to stretch on forever, workers coming and going in a rhythm that spoke of life and effort. She heard murmurs about the owner's sadness, about the deceased Helena, about how the big house had lost its luster since her death. This didn't surprise her, because from the moment she first saw Esteban's face, she noticed something about him, a gentle rigidity, an emotional weariness seen only in those who love deeply and lose more than they can bear. During the first few days, Marga worked tirelessly, learning the schedules and the rules, showing respect to everyone. Without raising her voice, some farmhands mocked her silence. Others said she was too young to understand life on such a large estate. But she didn't respond, because she knew that humility opens doors that pride cannot touch, and while she worked, every time Esteban passed by, he noticed her careful movements, her way of helping others without being asked, And above all, the calm she carried with her, a calm he hadn't felt since before losing his wife. The connection between them wasn't born from words or intense glances, but from small moments. When he saw her lift 2 heavy buckets without complaining, when she heard him give instructions firmly but without shooting, when he surprised her leaving food for a stray dog without expecting anyone to notice. These were gestures that had no romantic intention, but they built an invisible, slow, delicate bridge. After weeks, Esteban began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. He wondered where this young woman came from, why she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, but still smiled occasionally at the chickens, or at the children who passed by. And without meaning to, he began to look for her as he through the hacienda. They didn't talk much, she always showed respect, and he kept his distance from the boss. Each encounter left a warm feeling inside him, as if the silence that had inhabited his chest for years was losing its strength. It was one afternoon, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning orange, when Esteban found her alone, putting sacks away in the warehouse. And without knowing how, they stayed talking for a few minutes about the rain, about the weather, about simple things that meant nothing and at the same time meant everything. He felt something he didn't want to admit, and she perceived in his gaze a weight she couldn't name, but neither of them mentioned it. Destiny advanced without haste, but without pause, preparing the ground for the most improbable and transformative love that the hacienda had seen in decades. Esteban began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. He wondered where this young woman came from, why she seemed to carry the world on her shoulders, but still smiled from time to time at the chickens or at the children who passed nearby. And without meaning to, he began to look for her as he walked through the hacienda. They didn't talk much, she always showed respect, and he kept his distance from the boss, but each encounter left a warm feeling inside him, as if the silence that inhabited his chest for years was losing strength. It was one afternoon, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning orange, when Esteban found her alone, putting sacks away in the warehouse, and without knowing how, they stayed talking for a few minutes about the rain, about the weather, simple things that meant nothing, and at the same time meant everything. He felt something he didn't want to admit, and she perceived in his gaze a weight she couldn't name. But neither of them mentioned it. Fate moved forward slowly but surely, preparing the ground for the most improbable and transformative love the estate had seen in decades. Esteban began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. He wondered where this young woman came from, why she seemed to carry the world on her shoulders, but still smiled from time to time at the chickens or at the children who passed nearby. And without meaning to, he began to look for her as he walked through the hacienda. They didn't talk much, she always showed respect, and he kept his distance from the boss. But each encounter left a warm feeling inside him, as if the silence that had inhabited his chest for years was losing strength. It was one afternoon, as the sun was setting and the sky was turning orange, when Esteban found her alone, putting sacks away in the warehouse, and without knowing how, they stayed talking for a few minutes about the rain, quis que nada, about the weather, about simple things that meant nothing, and at the same time meant everything. He felt something he didn't want to admit, and she perceived in his gaze a weight she couldn't name. But neither of them mentioned it. Fate moved forward slowly but surely, preparing the ground for the most improbable and transformative love the estate had seen in decades. As the weeks passed, that warm feeling that had begun to grow between Esteban and Maria began to attract the attention of those who lived and worked on the hacienda, first as a distant murmur, then as a comment disguised as a joke, and then as a rumor that spread from mouth to mouth with the speed of the wind in storm season. No one could deny that the boss, the serious and silent man who since Helena's death had become a shadow of his former self, now seemed to stop for a few seconds longer when he saw the young woman pass by, or that his gaze softened just a little when she responded with a good day, boss, full of respect and shyness. At first the laborers commented on those scenes almost tenderly, saying that perhaps it was good to see the boss like that, with something other than sadness in his eyes. But soon the voices changed when envy, malice, and the need to invent stories mixed together. They began to say that the girl was trying to climb the social ladder, that she hadn't entered the hacienda out of hunger or need, but because she wanted to fish. For the most important man in the place, others claimed it was undignified for a young woman with no surname or history to try to attract the landowners' attention. And the women who had worked there for years looked at her with suspicion, as if her mere presence was stealing something that belonged to them. Marga heard everything, although no one said anything to her face, and each comment fell like another stone on the invisible weight she had carried since childhood, making her feel that no matter how hard she worked, how much humility she showed, or how much sincerity she put into every gesture, there would always be someone willing to trample on her dignity. Despite that, she continued to perform her duties without complaining, trying not to cross paths too much with Esteban to avoid suspicion, but that only fueled more rumors, because in the logic of gossip, silence always seems like confirmation. Meanwhile, Esteban began to notice a change in the way the workers acted when he arrived, in conversations abruptly cut short, glances averted, awkward smiles, and above all, a strange distance between him and the young woman, as if she were trying to vanish before he could even greet her. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt a growing unease, a disquiet he couldn't shake, until one day he overheard two cooks talking about the audacious one, who wanted to take the place of the deceased Helena. Esteban didn't intervene, but his hands tightened on the papers he was holding, and a mixture of anger, confusion, and sadness coursed through him. Why were they speaking like that about a girl who did nothing but work in silence? Why were they mentioning his wife as if she were a trophy? As if her memory were a piece that could be easily replaced? That night, as he walked alone through the hacienda, Esteban realized something that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. What people said mattered him because, although he had tried to deny it, Marga had begun to occupy a place within him, a small but real place. So real that it forced him to confront his grief and the guilt that came with feeling something new. On the other hand, miles away from the hacienda, Esteban's in-laws, Helena's brothers, and an aunt who had always been too judgmental, had also heard rumors. For them, the mere idea that the landowner could be interested in a servant was an unforgivable offense, a stain on his late wife's name, and proof, according to them, that Esteban had never loved her enough. They arrived at the hacienda unannounced, as they usually did when they wanted to impose their will, and showed up one afternoon while Marga was cleaning the entrance steps. She saw them get out of the carriage in expensive clothes, with haughty looks and judgmental expressions, and she felt a chill run down her spine. They didn't greet her, but they did observe her with a mixture of contempt and silent triumph, as if they had already condemned her without giving her a chance to defend herself. When they entered the house, Esteban received them with his usual courtesy, although his face hardened as soon as he noticed the looks they were directing towards the young woman. The conversation they had soon became tense. They insinuated that the Haitian needed order, that he should protect his reputation, that lately there had been too much gossip, and that perhaps he should review who he allowed to work in places so close to him. Esteban listened to them patiently at first, but when they mentioned Maria directly, saying that a girl like that could bring misfortune, and that Helena's memory deserved respect, he felt something inside him break, not from pain but from deep indignation. Even so, he didn't respond with shouts, because he never did, but with a firmness that surprised him. He said that no one had the right to judge an honest employee, that the rumors were just that, rumors, and that he made his own decisions without needing guardians to tell him what was right. His words weren't enough to stop the poison that was already circulating throughout the hacienda. After that family's visit, the workers began to treat Marga more harshly, some giving her unfair tasks, others ignoring her, others making comments meant to hurt her, she tried to keep her head held high. But at night she cried silently, hiding her face in her hands so her tears wouldn't make a sound. It was on one of those nights that Esteban found her by chance, sitting behind the barn with a lost look in his eyes. He didn't know what to say, because although he wanted to comfort her, he didn't want to cross a line he didn't fully understand. He approached carefully and asked her if she was all right, and Marga, exhausted, broken inside, answered that she was. Although her voice trembled as if each word were an effort, Esteban watched her in silence, feeling the weight of her pain as if it were his own. And for the first time in years he wished he wasn't the boss. He wished he could sit beside her, take her hands and tell her she wasn't alone. But didn't, because he was afraid of what that meant, however. Although neither of them said it out loud, that moment marked a before and after, because they both understood that what was growing between them could no longer be ignored, and that the rumors, the pressures, and the looks of others were only the beginning of the conflict that would test everything they felt without having confessed it yet. With the weight of the rumors growing each day and the atmosphere increasingly tense on the estate, Maria began to feel that her presence had become a burden to everyone, even to Esteban, although he never told her so. The silence with which he observed her, the concern hidden in his gaze, and the way he avoided getting too close so as not to worsen the gossip pierced her chest like invisible needles, making her feel that, however hard she tried, she would never fit in a place where the family name weighed more than the heart. The nights grew longer, filled with tears that she tried to hide, but which dampened her pillow until it was cold. And the days became an internal battle between continuing to fight for a job she needed or leaving before the shame consumed her. However, everything reached its limit one morning when, while sweeping the central hallway of the big house, she heard two of Helena's relatives talking to Esteban in the living room. They were visiting again. But this time their voices were harsher, more direct, as if they had lost their patience. One of them said that the hacendado was losing dignity, that the townspeople were already openly talking about the humble young woman who was trying to climb the ladder by taking advantage of the boss's loneliness, and that if Esteban wanted to honor Helena's memory he should act immediately, expel her, make it clear that he respected his wife's legacy. Marga, paralyzed behind the half-open door, felt a part of her soul break upon hearing this, not because she believed Esteban thought the same, but because she suddenly understood that their presence was causing real problems for the man who had been fair to her from the first day. Esteban's response was firm, even more so than the previous time. He said that no one had the right to insult an innocent employee, that he would not allow anyone to speak that way inside his house. But then Helena's aunt, with a sharp, resentful voice, uttered the phrase that wounded everyone present. "If Helena could see what you're doing, she'd be ashamed." Those words struck Esteban like a whip, returning him to a pain he thought he had under control. And although he said nothing, his heavy silence pierced the air. Maria, on the other side of the door, felt guilt take hold of her heart, because she understood that he was being forced to defend her at the cost of his wife's memory. That same night, after finishing her chores, she made the decision she had feared since the rumors began. She had to leave, not out of pride, but of love, a love that pained her to admit even to herself, but which compelled her not to be the shadow that would cause further wounds to the man who had begun to matter to her more than she had thought. She packed her small cloth bag with the few belongings she had. She put on her simplest dress and walked towards the exit of the hacienda without telling anyone, her heart beating fast, as if she knew she was leaving something irreplaceable behind. However, as she passed near the stables, she came face to face with Esteban, who seemed to have gone out for a walk to clear his mind. He looked her up and down, noticing the bag, the sad expression, the determination in her eyes, and without thinking twice he asked her where she was going. Marga lowered her gaze, unable to bear his question, and said that it was better to leave. that she didn't want to cause any more problems, that she didn't want to continue being a cause of conflict, that her intention was never to dishonor anyone's memory or put her job or her peace of mind at risk. The words came out of her broken, as if each one tore at her throat, and Esteban felt a blow to his chest, a mixture of fear and despair that he hadn't felt since he lost his wife. He tried to convince her with phrases meant to calm her. He told her that the rumors didn't matter, that she shouldn't bear the burden of others' evil, that he would trust her even if the world crumbled. But the more he spoke, the more she wept silently, because she understood that he was trapped between two pains, the grief for Helena and the guilt he felt for feeling something new. At one point, he took a step towards her, as if he wanted to physically stop her, take her arm and not let her cross the gate of the hacienda. But he stopped before touching her, fearing that such a gesture would confirm all the gossip. The silence that stretched between them was so profound it seemed to scream, a silence full of unspoken feelings, shared fears, open wounds. Finally, Marga raised her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, and with an almost broken voice said to him, "You deserve peace, boss, not problems, and I don't belong here." Those words, so sincere, so sad, completely disarmed him. He wanted to tell her that she belonged, that he didn't want to see her leave, that her presence had filled his house with something he thought was lost. But the pain for Helena was still there, clinging to his chest, reminding him that loving again was betraying a silent oath he had made to himself. So he didn't answer, or not in the way she needed. His final silence was the confirmation that Margaret interpreted as a goodbye. She took a step back, another toward the road, and without looking back, she left. Esteban felt the world around him stop, as if the walls of the hacienda were receding, leaving him alone again in an endless void. He wanted to call her, but his voice wouldn't come out. He wanted to run after her, but his feet wouldn't move. So, he watched her walk away until she became a tiny dot in the dim moonlight. And that moment became his new pain. A pain different from losing Helena, but just as deep, because this time it wasn't life that had taken someone from him, but himself, for not knowing how to face his heart. The following days the Haitian became a colder, quieter place, even for the other workers, who, although they never openly admitted it, felt the young woman's absence in every corner, and Esteban, locked in his solitude, realized that the loss of Maria did not calm the rumors or bring peace, but left a bigger void, a void that would force him to face the truth he had avoided for too long. The days following Maria's departure were a time of deep introspection for Esteban, a period in which every corner of the hacienda reminded him of what he had lost and what he had denied for so long. The mornings began with an emptiness that not even the brightest sun could illuminate, and the nights became endless, filled with memories of Helena and the pain of Maria's absence, mixing the guilt of letting her go with the fear of facing what he felt. However, it was on one of those silent dawns that something unexpected happened, a twist that would change the course of his story. A messenger arrived from one of the nearby towns with a simple envelope, marked with Esteban's name, and upon opening it he discovered letters, notes and messages from neighbors who had seen Maria days before, fighting against adversity, sick and alone, without family or support. At that moment, something inside him awoke, an impulse he hadn't felt in years, a mixture of fear, despair and hope that forced him to make decisions he had postponed for too long. He couldn't allow the young woman who had brought light into his life to suffer alone. And although memories of Helena still clung to him tightly, he understood that clinging to the past was only condemning him to a life of emptiness. So, after meditating for hours, he called his driver and instructed him to prepare the carriage, that he had to find her no matter the place, no matter the time, as he traveled along dusty roads and paths he had known since childhood. His thoughts tangled between guilt and hoping. He wondered if Maria would receive him, if she would forgive him for not having defended her more, if there was still a place in her heart for him. And at the same time he remembered every gesture, every smile, every look she had given him in the weeks they shared together at the hacienda. His journey took him to a small town on the edge of a river, where he found her working in the house of a family who had taken her in temporarily. She was tired, her clothes worn, her eyes marked by nights of worry and loneliness. But she still retained that inner light that had captured Esteban's heart from the first moment. Seeing her, he was speechless for a moment, watching her struggle to carry on. How her hands showed the hardness of the days she had lived and, at the same time, the gentleness of her spirit. She glanced at him sideways, surprised and with a flicker of fear mixed with curiosity, because she never expected him to search for her there, to cross paths, to ignore rumors and judgments to find her. When he finally approached, his words flowed with difficulty, full of emotion and sincerity. He explained that he couldn't bear to see her suffer, that the rumors, the family, and the fears no longer mattered. He had understood that true love could not be dictated by anyone other than the hearts of those who feel it. Maria listened, her chest pounding, tears falling silently, feeling how each word erased a little of the anguish she had carried for weeks. The tension that had marked their relationship transformed into a warm feeling, into the certainty that they had both been destined to meet and that nothing could stand in the way of what was beginning to be born between them. Esteban, aware that he had to be patient and respectful, offered her not only his company, but the possibility of returning to the hacienda, of rebuilding together what rumors and distance had tried to destroy. But he also recognized that she had to decide freely, that he could not force her or rush her feelings, because trust and freedom were the pillars of any true love. For hours they talked, shared memories, confessed fears and dreams. And in each word she felt how the barrier of years of pain and mistrust faded away, replaced by a bond that was strengthened by sincerity and tenderness. Esteban promised to protect, support, and cherish her, and Mara, with tears and smiles mingled, agreed to give a chance to the future they could build together. At that moment, under the open sky of the town, they understood that their story was not just a romance, but an act of courage. A conscious decision to confront the past, overcome prejudices, and surrender to a love that had been silent but powerful. From that instant, the hacienda would no longer be simply a space for work or tradition, but a place where they could both heal, grow, and transform their lives. The return journey was silent but full of meaning, with the young woman discreetly leaning on the arm of the man, who now represented hope and security. And with Esteban aware that every kilometer traveled not only brought them closer physically, but emotionally, solidifying a connection that neither distance nor rumors could destroy. Upon arrival, the first contact with the workers was a test of trust and courage, because they had to face curious stares, malicious comments, and the resistance of those who did not understand the depth of what had happened. But Esteban, now more resolute than ever, made it clear that Mara was not just an employee, but a life partner, someone who had transformed his heart and whose presence was fundamental to the well-being of the estate. The young woman, although shy, felt for the first time that she belonged to a place without having to change her essence, without having to apologize for her humility or her past tears. That day, as evening fell, while the sun painted the fields and stables orange, they both realized that they had overcome the hardest test in the trials. Fear and distance had tried to separate them, but fate, patient and silent, had reunited them, confirming that true love feels neither time, nor rumors, nor loneliness. And so, the story that had begun with timid glances and cautious silences now moved toward a stage of conscious decisions, commitment and hope, where every gesture, every word, every look had the power to transform not only their lives, but also the very essence of them. Maria's return to the hacienda was not simply a physical act of crossing the front door again, but a silent rebirth that permeated every corner of the place with a new energy, with the certainty that the love had grown between glances, silences, and small gestures could no longer be hidden or ignored. From the first moment, Esteban walked beside her through the corridors, subtly but firmly introducing her to the workers, who soon perceived that this bond was not a passing fantasy or an invented story. but a reality that had to be respected. The following days were full of small victories as Maria resumed her tasks, but this time with the recognition of the boss, while the laborers, who at first doubted and murmured, began to observe how her presence transformed the dynamics of the hacienda, bringing not only efficiency, but an air of warmth and hope that before seemed impossible. Each dawn was an opportunity for them to share simple moments, like walking through the fields, observing the movement of the animals, or exchanging words that, although everyday, were loaded with deep meanings and contained emotions that no longer needed to be hidden. Esteban, aware that he had left behind his fear of loving again, began to open his heart without reservations. Letting Marga know his most intimate thoughts, his pain for Helena, his fears, and the way in which his encounter with her had been an unexpected balm, while Marga, with her patience and tenderness, learned to read not only his words but the silences that spoke of a soul marked by loss but willing to be reborn. Together they began to plan small projects on the hacienda, fix forgotten spaces, organize the harvest with a more humane order, even introduce new ideas that strengthened the relationship between the workers and the administration, all while the bond between them deepened and became inseparable. One afternoon, as the sun slowly set over the golden fields, Esteban took Maria's hand and led her to a secluded spot where a small lookout offered a panoramic view of the hacienda and the surrounding valley. There, with the wind playing in her hair and their eyes reflecting emotions held back for months, he told her about his most important decision. He didn't want her to be merely a part of the hacienda, but a part of his life, his world, his days and nights. He promised her not only love, but commitment, care, and unconditional respect. Maria, tears streaming down her cheeks, listened as each of Esteban's words seemed to erase years of fear, doubt, and pain, confirming that what she felt was not a whim or an illusion, but proof that two souls who had found each other in adversity could rebuild their lives together. That moment became the pinnacle of their story. The silences that had united them, the conflicts that had separated them, and the trials that had made them stronger, all converged in a moment of clarity, certainty, and promise. There was no need for grandiloquent speeches or exaggerated gestures, because understanding and sincerity spoke for themselves, and they both knew that from that day forward nothing could erase what they had built. The days that followed the engagement were filled with small rituals of trust, shared breakfasts before the hacienda fully awoke, walks at sunset to plan future harvests and projects, nighttime conversations in front of the fireplace where they talked about their dreams and how they wanted their lives to develop together, and also about the wounds of the past, which they shared in order to heal. The transformation of the hacienda paralleled that of their hearts. The workers began to perceive a new atmosphere, one where harmony and respect replaced tension and whispers, and where the humble young woman, who was once looked down upon, became a symbol of strength and kindness, inspiring others to believe in the capacity to overcome adversity. Helena's family, observing the changes, gradually accepted that this was not a challenge to the memory of their sister, but confirmation that true love could coexist with memory, and that Esteban's happiness was now tangible and visible. And so, amidst laughter, tears of joy, moments of tenderness and silent gestures, the entire hacienda seemed to breathe differently, as if celebrating the union of two souls who had found each other despite all obstacles. Esteban and Maria learned to enjoy the details, the way she arranged the flowers at the entrance, how he told her stories of his childhood on the hacienda, how they shared silences that needed no words, and how each day together strengthened the certainty that they were destined to cross paths. The promise they made to each other was not only of romantic love, but to be life partners, allies in the face of any adversity, and guardians of each other's hearts, and in the intimacy of their bond, without the need for spectators or anyone's approval. They both understood that what they had built surpassed any rumor, any judgment, and any past pain, because their love had been tested, separated, and then reunited stronger than before. Thus, as the sun set behind the hills and the hacienda was bathed in golden and pink hues, Esteban took Maria's hand once more and, without words, they sealed a silent pact that spoke of hope, resilience, and a love capable of transforming not only individual lives, but an entire place and those who inhabited it. That day, they not only began a new stage of their lives, but also confirmed that destiny, patient and wise, had woven a path that, although tortuous and full of trials, finally, it led them to the eternal promise they had both unknowingly awaited for so long, and which now, with every glance and every gesture, was sealed in their hearts and on the fields. After everything they had been through, Esteban and Marga understood that their story didn't have a definitive ending, but rather a page that continued to be written with each sunrise, with each gesture, and with each shared decision. The hacienda, which had once witnessed loneliness, whispers, and pain, became a stage for renewed life, where Marga's laughter, mingled with Esteban's firm yet serene voice, transformed into a hymn of resilience and hope. Every worker, every corner, and every animal seemed to recognize that something special had happened. That love, silent and patient, had blossomed amidst difficulties and mistrust, teaching that true strength lies not in power, wealth, or family name, but in the kindness of the heart and the capacity to forgive, to wait, and to take risks. Together they learned that true love demands courage, that facing one's own fears and the judgments of others is part of the journey, and that sometimes silence speaks louder than words, clearly showing what truly matters. Maria discovered that her humility and patience were not weaknesses, but tools that transformed not only the one she loved, but the entire environment around her. While Esteban understood that opening one's heart after pain does not mean forgetting, but honoring what has been lost while allowing something new and beautiful to be born. Every walk through the fields, every conversation by the fire, every shared project on the farm became a reminder that life always has second chances, and that sometimes love arrives when least expected, defying social norms, rumors, and external expectations. Together they also learned that it is not about having everything perfect, but about building a space where mistakes can be repaired, where tears and smiles coexist, and where sincerity and understanding are the pillars that sustain any relationship, even on difficult days when the past surfaced and the echoes of Helena or the murmurs of the town returned. They both reminded each other that the choice to love and trust is more powerful than any shadow of pain. Over time, Esteban and Mara's story became a living lesson for everyone who lived on the hacienda. Respect, patience, dedication, and the courage to face adversity could transform lives, unite hearts, and create a legacy that transcended the memory of a loss. As the sun set behind the golden fields and the nights brought a profound and serene silence, the two walked together, aware that each day they were writing new lines on the page of their story, which, although it would never be completely closed, would always have room to grow, to laugh, to dream, and to remember that love, when it is true, knows no limits or barriers. And it was at that moment, with the breeze caressing their faces and their eyes shining with shared emotion, they understood that their story was also a gift for those who listened to it. For those who learn that second chances exist and that the courage to love again can transform not only individual lives, but an entire community, inspiring others to move forward, to believe in goodness, to fight for their feelings, and no longer give up in the face of obstacles. Thus, while the channel's narrator invites those who have followed this story to reflect on their own lives, their own fears, and their own loves, the story of Esteban and Marga remains open, an unfinished page that will continue to be written in every heart that dares to feel, to trust, and to love. Leaving a clear message: in life always offers another chance. There is always hope, and true love, the kind that is born of sincerity and patience, always finds its way, transforming not only those who experience it, but also all those who have the privilege of witnessing its existence. Reminding us that even after the deepest pain, happiness can be reborn, and that every gesture, every look, every word shared with the one we love is another chapter in the ongoing story.